This is the Wholehearted Way podcast brought to you by the Wellspring Group. I'm Nathan King, a facilitator of Wellspring programs. Today's conversation is with Matt Armbruster. Matt went through a group experience, the Battle for the Heart, which consists of a retreat and small group program that taught him how to really listen to people, how to respond in a way that honors someone when they share something difficult. It wasn't designed for work, but what he learned was so powerful, he couldn't help but bring it into how he led his team. And what he discovered is that most workplaces are a desert when it comes to people feeling heard and seen. We spend most of our waking hours at work, and somehow we've decided that emotion and authenticity don't belong there. No wonder it feels like a dry and dusty place. Matt pushed into this desert anyway, and his results were remarkable. He had zero turnover during COVID while the rest of the company was losing people, and leadership noticed. And so they ended up creating an entirely new role for him around employee engagement and leadership development. In this conversation, we get into what he actually did, why it was hard, and what it opened up for him and for the people around him. One note, this episode was recorded as a live conversation, so towards the end, you'll hear a few audience questions. I hope you enjoyed this podcast with Matt Armbruster. So Matt, if we could start with, I imagine that you were in the workforce for quite a long time before you ever went through the Battle for the Heart. And that allowed you to figure out what worked for you at work, how to be effective, and how to navigate a separation, so to speak, or some level of integration of your spiritual life and your work life. But I have to imagine that there was a time when you were experiencing a lot of growth and renewal through the Battle for the Heart process, and that you're sitting there at work and you're starting to wonder, how do I bring some of this in here? If we could get in a time machine and go to those early experiences, what was going through your mind? What were you thinking about Wellspring and what you were getting out of that and what was going on at work?
Yeah. Well, I wish it were as incredibly intentional as that sounds. I think the way it started for me was, rather than me thinking, I'm going to bring Wellspring in, here's how I should do it, or how can I do it, I noticed myself responding to the human beings in my team and that I was working with in a way that kind of came from the Wellspring practice and just the intense, you're in a group, you're in a couple different groups, and it's a long period of time you're together that you're responding to each other. Now, what I found was even something as simple as a 3-point response. I'd like to think that I was active listening before, but I think the authentic kind of responding to people, once I learned about it through Wellspring, and I was simply responding that way to people, because it's hard to spend a lot of time with people at work without learning something if you're engaging them. And this was my team. I was a manager of about 45 people, and I was leading leaders and interacting with the whole team. And I just found when people were sharing something difficult and I responded in a way that I think honored them and valued them in a superior way to what I was doing before, I think it changed the relationships, which changed what was being shared, which, in addition to just the humanness and honoring God's creation in the moment, also led me to understand them better, which helped me lead them better, and help them feel heard and led. And I think the word heard, I know that in Wellspring, we talk about feeling heard and feeling seen. And what I found was, to me, it's two sides of the same coin. On the one hand, I'm thankful and grateful that when those people received the response that they needed at the time. That's the good side of the coin. The distressing side of the coin is that they are not experiencing that otherwise. And so I felt like there's a desert out there of people feeling engaged and heard and seen. And when they experience it, I think that is what started to change things.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does definitely make sense. And I've spent a lot of time in corporate America myself. And I like the desert image because that, when it comes to heart connection, that feels very appropriate for most environments. How did people, and there aren't many people given 3-point responses in corporate America either. How did people on your team respond? Like, what was it like for them to hear you do that, cover them like that?
I would say the responses were emotional, um, and thankful. Um, Emotional to the point where I knew I actually thought I should be careful. Where is the line? I'm not a counselor. We're at work. I'm in the secular environment. And, um, it's to the some of the responses were to the point where, whoa, what door did I open? Uh, what, what did I unleash? And so some of the responses were emotional. Some of them, I would say not earlier on, but a little later. I'd say more recently, with the change in roles from then, was I mean, the thing that comes to mind when you say that is I was meeting with an employee at work who had gone through something very, very difficult at work from a colleague. And just in hearing this person tell their story and tell me what was going on and see what we could do about it, they shared that they had as a child, they had been harmed, and that influenced how they reacted to their colleague. And I don't know why. I really don't know why, but I ended up just saying to that person, it wasn't your fault. And they stopped. They could not talk for a while, and they eventually said that no one had ever said that to them.
Whoa.
This is an adult working in a laboratory, on with their life, and no one had ever sat with them and told them something they definitely needed to hear.
Yeah. That raised the hair on my arms to hear you share that.
Yeah, it's hard not to get emotional telling that story.
Ah, absolutely. And that, I mean, your own experience of emotion right there makes me think, like, one of the reasons that many people don't want to touch emotion at work
Mhm.
is because it's so messy, and that experience of what have I unleashed? I don't know how to control or what to do, how to respond to this. But yet you took a different approach. You plowed ahead. You went ahead. And I'm wondering, what desire did you sense there underlying that gave you
Well,
the courage to keep going?
so my one of my deep desires is impact, for sure. And as time went on, and you say pressing forward, and over time, that was back in 2017, and over time, and I wouldn't begin to say I know all the factors involved. There are a lot of different factors. Anybody who works knows you can't pin it on one thing. But what happened is, during COVID, like a lot of companies, we had a spike in turnover, and versus prior. And so in my team, we got some new leadership at the company, and they were looking at turnover. And I got a question because while we had spiked across the company, I had zero turnover, and just zero. And I ended up in a lot of conversations, and I had to decide whether to push forward, to your point. And push forward for me meant change my job entirely. I had been with the company 15 years at that point, in a couple of different capacities, but leading the team I mentioned before. And they said we would like to create a role around employee engagement and development, and they asked if I'd be willing to fill the role, so I did. So pushing forward meant I just completely jumped into a different job.
Wow.
And with that, I got a lot of opportunity. I got the opportunity to interacting. We probably have 350 leaders at our company of all different levels, and I got a chance to interact with many of them. And even going, there's, different iterations, a chance to bring different experiences to those leaders, with kind of created groups. We can talk about that if you want. And then even to the point where now we have a leadership academy. We have a PhD leadership professor, and she decided to have other people at the company be kind of additional faculty for a second level leadership curriculum. And I'm doing I'm doing a session on employee engagement. And so I am 3 times a year getting leaders in there, and I'm basically teaching them and encouraging them, and they're interacting with their teams and one-on-ones of their teams to basically do something close to the 1 to 3 words. Like, I am telling them, hey, if you have an employee share something difficult with you, if you want to stick around at the end of this presentation, we can talk about how one way that you can use to really make sure that your person who's going through a difficult time feels heard. And everybody sticks around, because everybody has somebody reporting to them that has gone through a difficult time, or they know they will, because it's the experience that we all know. So basically, I teach 3-point response to whatever leader is willing to listen. So
that's really incredible.
Yeah.
And want to drill into you mentioned creating small groups. That definitely makes my ears perk up in a secular environment, what that must look like. But if we could back up for a second, it sounds like what you were saying was you were a manager of 40-ish people. There was high turnover, but not in your area. There was no turnover. That's what got the attention of of more broadly executive leadership.
Yeah.
And I imagine there were some questions about, what are you doing, Matt? How do we import this? But what you're doing is not conventional. So how was that received when you explained what you were doing?
I think this is a very important thing, but it wasn't just this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Of course we were, it was, I'd say across the company, it's desired, but not 100% consistent that folks are getting good interaction with their leaders. But in my area, it was not negotiable. With the leaders that I was developing who reported to me, and me with my leaders as I was trying to role model as best I could, which is far from perfect. So we were engaging our people on a regular and intentional basis. And we were, working with them on their careers and doing it in an appropriate way and building trust. I think the difference is that engaging people in this way makes all of the rest of it work better. It makes it possible. It's hard to know where someone wants to go with their career or what they really like or don't like if you're just asking questions off a sheet. One of the things that I try to talk to leaders about is, the kind of heart check we just did, like a secular version of that. I say, if you will give, this is kind of, I've said this at work a dozen times in the last 2 weeks. If you're willing to devote 2 minutes of every one-on-one, I really believe that over a course of time, you're going to drastically and exponentially increase the possibility for connection between you and your person. That's kind of what I say to the leaders, because I really do believe if you do the secular version of a heart check, every one-on-one with your person over time, and you're going to get lots of opportunity. And then we talk about how to engage them when that happens. So, and how to deal with some of the difficult things. The other thing is, in my current role in the HR world, which is only a few years, in the making here, is I get the chance to sit with employees, but also their leaders. Sometimes it's one-on-one, but sometimes the leader is there or the junior leader is there with the senior leader. And so I am engaging the person while someone else is watching and listening. And so I get a chance to show that leader one way that they could consider engaging their people. So did I answer your question, Nathan? I don't know.
Absolutely. What kind of feedback have you gotten from people observing you engage somebody?
I'd say a lot of folks aren't sure that they can do it. A lot of folks aren't sure that, I don't know if it's because I work in a building full of scientists. I shouldn't say that, but my background was in science, so I feel like I can say it. But So, but a lot of folks aren't sure that they have the capacity. And then that's when it's a good opportunity to talk about how it can kind of be simple. It can kind of be simple. Um, I think in the Wellspring experience, you have so much time and you get a lot of background on your group members, and there's a lot of intensity that brings a lot of great connection. And at work, it's a different type of thing. So you almost have to simplify something like a 3-point response, um, to the point where sometimes you're just, wow, how can I say it? You really got to be careful about offering something even more so maybe than in a Wellspring group. Um, it can be tough. So yeah, that's the number one response is people aren't sure that they can do it, but they do say they want to.
Right. Which is really interesting.
Yeah.
Potential. What do you think that's saying about desire in them? Have you thought through what that might be?
I haven't. What do you think?
Well, I would assume that underneath that is the desire to have connection, the desire to help and not be so stuck when someone talks about how they're having a bad day or even cries in front of you, which just people run for the woods when they see tears if they're extremely analytical. They just don't know what to do.
I think desire, you just used the word desire. I think you reminded me of an experience. So one thing I've seen my pastor do in a group experience is when two people are engaged, he will sometimes ask someone else what it felt like to watch that. And I think that's part of what brings up the desire. And so I had a leadership class or an experience with a certain division, and I asked them to ruminate on certain words that had to do with connection and feeling seen. I used valued, seen, heard, respected. I used all those words, and I had this leader. I said, anybody, do they have a memory of feeling heard and respected by a leader? And so someone told a story on this side of the room. So I stole from my pastor, and I asked somebody in the other side of the room, hey, and this is at work, I'm doing it with these. And I said, what did it feel like to listen to that? And that person over there got emotional saying, I want to have that kind of connection. I want my people to feel led by me in that way. So I think one of the benefits here of doing some of this stuff as at work is you'll tap into some of those things that people weren't sure. People don't get a lot of opportunity, if any, to feel that tug unless they're watching a movie like we all do at the beginning of Wellspring stuff.
Yeah.
They don't. So when they're in a room with two real people and they see something real happen, the desire you spoke of, I think, is sparked big time.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
You mentioned starting small groups. And how many people were involved in the end?
Well, at the
beginning, how many were involved?
At the beginning, my boss, when I came into the people role, he said, and this would be natural. I think a lot of people do this. He said, I want to talk to all the leaders. He said, I had a goal on my job plan. By this time, talk to 90% of our leaders. So for us, that's hundreds, right? So I'd talk to all these leaders. And one of the threads that was very consistent was a desire for connection across divisions, across departments, and for different reasons, best practices, scientific best practices, other things, but also peer support. As people move up in leadership, they often get more lonely, right? They have a different relationship with the people that maybe were their peers before. They can't share everything with their boss. And that's one role I try to take on in our company where possible is, hey, I'm someone you can talk to. There's no weight of authority between us. And so we had desire for connection. So I went to my boss and I said, hey, could we try a pilot, 3 months? We'll call them connection groups. So peer leadership groups, 3 or 4 people at this level, 3 or 4 people, all at the same level. And at first I got a no. My boss said, yeah, I think that would be okay, but you need to go talk to the president of the company. He's not so sure. Okay. So I went down there and I talked to him. I said, hey, I set up a meeting, of course. I don't have high enough rank that
You didn't just barge in and burst in his office and
I
what's
didn't burst in and start throwing stuff. That this was Tuesday, so I would only do that on Thursday. So I think I went down there and I said have this. I told him about the idea. I said, I know that my boss talked to you about it and you have some concerns. Can you share? And his concern was that we have a lot of great leaders, a lot of great people. He said, but what if you get a bad apple in the mix? That could be messy. I said, yes, that could happen. I said, yes, that's a risk. I said, but your risk is greater now with a lack of connection than it is for something that might not ever happen. He's like, okay. He bought it. It wasn't that quick, but he bought it. And so I put out the call to 300, probably at the time, 300 leaders. And I was hoping to get 2 or 3 4-person groups to try it out for 3 months. And I had 115 people reply right away that they wanted to do it. And I was blown away. I was like, well, they weren't lying to me. They did want it. And so we did that. And so we've had anywhere from 80 to 120. I moved it up to 6-month sessions now. We do 6-month sessions. These are randomly created group. I just found a free website where I can put names in and it randomly creates groups. As long as they're not in the same department, I do a launch session every time. And that's another time when someone gets into these groups every 6 months, they hear from me about engaging the people in their group. I am trying to get them to tell their story. And when I say story, I talk to them about transparency and authenticity being like rocket fuel for groups, for these groups. And I talk to them about this idea. You could start every meeting by sharing this when you get together. And I model it, and I model it with how I'm feeling that day, like all of you did, when Laura broke us up. I'd pick that day. So those people might hear about, like, if there's a struggle with my son, right? If there's a joy with something else. And I usually do a personal and a work to show them that both are okay. So yeah, that's what happened with connection groups, and they're still going. And it's been 2.5 years.
Wow. So. And they've grown.
And they've grown. I mean, some people come in and out of groups. Some people they stick in the same group. Some people want to get into new groups to meet more people. Some people get too busy and they drop out and come back later. So,
and you said a minute ago, I think if I heard this right, transparency is rocket fuel.
I don't know. Authenticity and transparency are like rocket fuel for the group experience. It's like it changes everything. Just changes everything. And telling the story is often a good way to make that happen.
What do you say to those who are interested but reluctant to bring some of these approaches into the workplace?
Well, everyone's company is different. I can only speak from my experience, but for me, every proposal I've ever been successful in had to include a risk scenario, like what's the risk of doing this, or what's the risk of not doing this versus where we are now, and of course the reward. But I would say, can you repeat your question?
Well, for someone who's interested, but maybe they're holding back, and what would you say to them, just if you were to counsel? So you're saying, one, include some snapshot of what could go wrong.
I should go backwards. I think you said, what would you say to them if they're apprehensive? I would say, consider your desires in the workplace and your deep desires, and how those deep desires might be brought to the workplace. And so, because if you're not personally motivated, it would be difficult to do this kind of thing, because it's not magic. I think we've all been in situations where the chemistry in a group isn't always great. And in a chemistry between a leader and an employee, perhaps they didn't have a great relationship before, or it was middling, fair to middling, I don't know. And so they have to stick it out. They're not going to get 2 hours of this every week with their people. They're not. Like, you would not convince in a secular company that you should spend an hour connecting on an emotional level in your one-on-one with your employee, and not talking about whatever needs to get done.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah.
And so that can take longer to build something that they are seeing results from.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say if you're not personally motivated to guide people through a longer continuum to get success, then that might be hard to get started. So I'd say it would start and understand, why do you want to bring it to work? What difference can it make?
Mm-hmm.
That would be a place to start.
Great. Thank you, Matt.
Mm.
For those of you who are watching, if you have a question that hasn't been answered, feel free to unmute yourself and to ask Matt what might be on your mind.
Matt, I have a question for you. Tom Brinks.
Hi, Tom.
Thank you. I've been in business for many, many years, and it's just very refreshing and exciting to my heart to hear being able to make an impact. How did you keep covering of the 3-point response? You know, as you focused on the skills, how did you have struggles with people who, I mean, one of the things that Wellspring does is it provides a foundational heart, loving God and loving others, and that the skills are something to kind of express that concern for others. And I mean, did you just focus on the skills, or the skills and heart level connection?
So that's a very good point, Tom. I'm not taking time with these leaders to go through a process of uncovering where their heart is and why it's there. I would say there is more of a heavy focus on this. There's more focus on the skill, but something I find myself saying at work a lot is, hey, this is the right thing for this human being. It's also the right thing for the business. And I personally want to live where those two things overlap as much as possible, because that's where I'm going to get as much support from my leaders, and I'm going to get, more people into it. So I'd say, I'm talking about, it's easy to tie this stuff into active listening. And it's almost like a bump up level of active listening. Most of the people in the business world, depending on what your industry is, you've heard about active listening. You might have had a training on active listening, especially if you're in leadership. And so if you say this is kind of like a add-on skill for active listening. And so, and I'd say I concentrate on the skill, Tom, because I think Nathan's point earlier is it's going to happen. Something's going to be difficult. It's going to be shared with this leader, and they feel stuck on how to respond. And so this is a skill on how to respond. So I am more focused on the skill. I would say the people who come back and tell me about an experience they've had, and they tell me what that was like, I then get to dig in a little bit about the heart. But again, I have to say, it's not going to be as deep as it is in a battle meeting.
Great question. Jerry asked in the chat what the frequency and duration of group times are.
For that program, for the
Yes.
connection group program, it is 1 hour a month for 6 months.
Okay.
That's it. It's really hard to get. I mean, it's like for these leaders, they're their schedules are very busy. They're on client calls, they're in their one. And so it's easy for them to find an hour. It's tougher for them to find the same hour, right? As you can imagine. And so I start with an hour. Now, what I find is the really good groups, they do other stuff sometimes. The really good groups, they want to get in the mix for the next 6-month session, but they actually stay with that group for like a quarterly get together. And I give almost no rules. I mean, basically that's one of the points I make in a kickoff session. Like, the nuts and bolts, here they are. And there aren't many. There just aren't many. I'm like, I tell them, I don't care where you meet. I don't care when you meet. I don't care what you talk about. We've got people that'll meet in the building in a conference room. And we got people that'll go down the street to the restaurant after work, just whatever works for them. So yeah, awesome. It's not a lot, Jerry. It's not a lot.
Yeah. And Laura asked in the chat, what does a secular heart check look like? Is it the same 2 to 3 feeling words?
Highlight and challenge. I would say the highlight and challenge is the most typical thing I start people with. Highlight and the challenge, because that can look an awful lot like 1 to 3 words. I actually have done the words a little bit with people. One thing is I run a report every 3 or 4 months on who's been promoted into leadership at our company, and I get some time with them, and I introduce them to this at that time also. I'm showing them I'm trying to make sure they're aware of some opportunities at the company for leaders to develop. I'm making sure there are some resources available on our intranet, on our SharePoint, making sure I interact with them and tell them I'm a resource to you. You're not alone. I said, you don't have to do this alone. And I'm telling them about this. And so I'm doing highlight and challenge. I call that like 101. And I say 1 to 3 words is like 301 or 401. And I said, at work here, that might be very difficult. I tell them, because those words can tend to be emotion words. I said, you have to feel it out with your person, but I always recommend starting with highlight and challenge, because no one will react weirdly to that. I mean, they won't think I'm trying to put one over on them like a counselor or some pastor or something.
Yeah. Matt, I have a question.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing this, by the way. I love this. So would you say there were any kind of metrics that you were using or somebody might use as far as the successfulness of these connection groups?
We are not there yet. Usually at my work, I look at retention metrics at different levels for the different teams. And I get to talk about where I know teams are employing certain consistent skills or consistent just behaviors, types of communication, and those that are not. And often the people that are communicating better have better metrics. I would say one thing is we got some feedback. We had everyone, they used to call them stay interviews. We called them touch points. So just, we ask our leaders to connect with their employees on non-work tasks, motivation and desire and interaction with their leader a couple times a year at least. And that gave us not hard. I would say we got qualitative information. We didn't get quantitative metrics because we got to pick up threads, I guess. We got to pick up in one team, what did they hear most often? And then build up to their department, what did they hear? And I got to deliver a report to senior leadership and saying, here are the threads in each. So that's still qualitative, Mike. That was a long way to say no.
But that's still good, because even in like medicine, we use a lot of subjective testing that gives you really good insight into the health of somebody.
Yeah. I mean, we, one thing we do is I'd say the best, a lot of people do this, I know, is introducing or making sure your teams are doing skip level meetings. That's a great way to find out how a leader is engaging their direct reports. And so I try to convince as many of our leaders as possible to have skip level meetings and then have them happen down on through. Like if I'm talking to a vice president who might have 300 people reporting up through him, he's got a whole bunch of leaders at different levels. So I'm trying to convince him or her to have it themselves, model it, and then do it down through. I'm not always successful in that one.
Cool. Thank you.
Matt, I've got a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you have any boundaries that you teach for leaders getting involved with employees, and that you don't cross emotional boundaries? Because exposing people who haven't gone through training at Wellspring, especially the secular world, I have a friend who's gone through battle and got fired by HR for loving people under his care too well.
Yeah. I'd say that is, I have to worry about boundaries, Bob, for myself, because I'm in an HR role. And often when when I am talking with someone, it might be a very difficult time for them. They may be seeking some sort of protected leave because of an issue with their family or themselves, or something happened to them at work or what have you. And so I have to watch it myself. And I'd say the way I think about it, I don't say it, is, if you've been to a battle event and someone's asking, what would it bring you? What does that bring you? What does that bring you? What does that bring you? If you guys have witnessed that interaction, you got to hold back from the subsequent, what would that bring you? I mean, figuratively, the what would that bring you is you have to almost, what I talk to people about is you can cover, I don't use the word cover, right? So you can respond to them in this way. But you've got to be careful with follow-up questions. You want to give space and time, and safety. So I would say what I tell them is, you want to say, hey, you want to give them some kind of response that shows them they were heard and seen and not rejected. And you want to have a response, your own response, but give it space there.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
good.
if that makes sense, because one of the time, like I'd say, sorry, I'm just having memory. This was just about a month ago. I got called over to another building by a leader who someone was in an emotional crisis, right? So they had said some words to, I'm not going to go into details here. They had said some words to their leader that made their leader concerned for their safety. And so I went to the room, and the leader was with me, and the employee was there. And one of the things that we did was we said, hey, if you need some time in this office, this room, you have it. We can be here, we can not be here. You can use that phone. That person, thank the Lord, had a counselor. That's great when that's the case. And they got to connect. So when things, I was able to respond in the way that we've been talking about, but then also find ways to give the person space and safety. And I'm kind of backing away from the real emotion. I'd say the deeper emotion. It's tough, Bob, because you want to.
Right.
You
gotta
want
hold
to.
yourself back. I'm so encouraged to hear you have that on your radar and you're actively protecting your own heart from getting too far in.
It's tough for me. I will be in a room also with I'm talking with men, with women. And so I don't want to come across in any way that would be inappropriate. That I have a fear of someone think I'm being inappropriate. That would be awful. I don't want that anyway. But yeah, it's harder, Bob, to talk to other people about it. I would say that's more situational.
Yeah.
Great question, Bob. Thank you for that. Well, what we'd like to do now is to go back into breakout groups for 5 minutes, just to debrief in a small group format about what we took away today. But before we do, Matt, this was really impactful to hear your story, and we appreciate you taking the time and speaking so candidly with us about what your experience has been like. And I feel like I've learned a lot in listening to you, and find myself more motivated to engage others and to be thoughtful and intentional about it. And I'm sure I'm not the only one with that takeaway.